So pardon me if my question is sophomoric, but when I hear the word cancer, I get kind of confused about what actually the definition of it is, because you hear about viral causes of cancer, like a cervical cancer, and you hear about genetic predispositions to cancer, the BRCA gene, et cetera, and I wonder how you actually define cancer, and what the relationship that is to breast cancer. Are there viral causes, or is that off the table? And how does that affect how you approach curing, quote, curing cancer or eliminating cancer?
So that's not a bad question at all.
That's a good question.
It's about a textbook, but so Monica, you want to take a stab at a definition for cancer for our brave question?
It's a spectacular question because it has no simple answer. And in its simplest form, a cancer is a growth of cells within the body that gets out of control in a manner that causes great harm. That's the simplest definition for cancer. And usually we attribute cancer as being able to do that either by just destroying tissues where it appears, or in the case of breast cancer, where usually it becomes the most harmful, where it can metastasize and grow someplace where that cell was never intended to be. And that functional definition is what cancer really is. Now, on a molecular level and on an individual patient level, what defines a cancer? We know a lot, but we certainly don't know this completely. We know it takes two things. It takes changes in those cells that make the cell behave in a vastly abnormal way. And those are usually mutations in genes, or X-ray beam causes a mole to turn into a melanoma. Who knows for breast cancer? It could be a gene that was inherited that then gets another little insult on top of it. So some changes in the genes. But also, we know that that's probably not enough for almost all the cancers we study, and that in addition to that cell getting a cancer-predisposing genetic change, there are other factors. Could be diet, could be the overall health, could be genes that the person has that normally don't cause any trouble at all, but when they get linked with a certain type of diet or a certain situation, really cause this big, complex event that causes these cells to become what we know as cancer. So it's a really complex answer that I think examples of the panel are, we're all trying to peel away at this from all of our different perspectives. And the reason, I'll finish right now, the reason I think it's such a great question is that question goes to the heart of why somebody who just studies obesity, or just studies diet, or just studies PI3 kinase, or just studies genes is never going to crack this problem. That's exactly why, because nothing that we do as individuals is ever going to really get to the whole thing.
So I'll come at this a different way, and then I think Jose will say something, but you touched on both what the disease is, but also the causes. And it is absolutely true that there are some malignancies. The best example probably in the world, the best two examples might be hepatoma, hepatocellular carcinoma, and cervix cancer, which are largely mediated by viruses. You get an infection, an old-fashioned infectious disease, and a consequence later of having been infected is this malignancy. Also head and neck cancers, which was in the news this week. But that's one explanation for the transformation or change in one type of cell to malignancy. It isn't the only answer to how people develop cancer, although it might provide a hint.
Yeah, so I think that if we take the definition that Monica has given us about what cancer is, you can get there by many means, right? Mm-hmm. So viruses can give you cancer. Now, at one point, there was the perception that viruses were going to be like the dominant source for cancer. And there was even a Nobel Prize that was awarded for a person that identified that one virus was causing cancer. And this was a big scare because, I mean, can you imagine that viruses can give cancer? I mean, that would be a pretty frightening concept. We know today that the number of cancers that are produced by viruses are very, very limited. I can think basically of the case that Cliff was mentioning about liver cancer due to hepatitis viruses. I can think of the viruses that are involved in cervix carcinoma and increasingly in head and neck cancer. But this is going to be a minority. So we have viruses as one reason. The other one is exposure to substances that we call carcinogens, that upon continuous exposure, they have an inflammatory effect, and they can induce the cells to degenerate into cancer. Classical example, smoking. Classical example, what we're talking about some potential diets. So these are external agents that interfere. And then we have just events that happen randomly. Cells divide, and we have billions of cells. So it's uncommon, but it can happen that some things can go wrong, that a division can go crazy. And that's, so I think the biggest risk for having cancer basically is to be alive, right? Because you have cell divisions and errors can occur. So that's another thing. And then the final one is, and this is again very, very uncommon, but it's there, some genes predisposed to cancer, some mutations in genes predisposed to cancer. And in some cases, these genes can be hereditary, so they can be in a family. But this again is a very small. So just in summing up, we have multiple ways by which a cancer can develop at the end.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lou.
I just last one additional point that there's probably no two people in America have exactly the same set of mutations driving their breast cancer. Mm-hmm. So to say we need personalized cancer treatment is absolutely true. We divide them into subgroups, but all ER positives are not the same mutations. All HER2 positive are not the same mutations. And that it remains to be seen how many subdivisions we're really going to have to get into in order to really get cures for each patient. But it's not, by divide and conquer is the way we'll do it.
Well, I agree completely, but I'm an optimist about this. The same way that the space program was launched and we went to the moon with less computing power than you have in a smartphone, and that's true. I mean, it's not even a close call. The technology to begin to tackle this problem seems so daunting and unreachable, but it's really probably not. And the time will come when we can actually do just what Lou suggests and figure out what it is that drives an individual's cancer and go from there. I think this has to be the very last comment, Monica, if you were...
Oh, just quickly, I think that one of the things that the group that I work with, one of the reasons it's so essential now is that as we begin to sub-segment patients on an individual personalized medicine basis. This is why it takes such a large network and such a large team to do this kind of work. If you can imagine, there are now very specific treatments that work beautifully in a tiny subset of people with the disease. But in order to prove that, we have to find them. We have to bring them in. We have to get those patients together and understand the networks to do that. And that's essentially what these groups do.